First thing we need to do is to insert the CPU. The CPU goes in this socket, but as it is delivered it has a protective cover which firstly has to be removed, and there's a little tongue here that says remove, so we just unclip it and remove it. It's important that you keep this, because if you have to return a faulty motherboard at any time, the manufacturers insist that this cover be inserted in that space. So keep it. We then release the fastener, take the CPU chip. Now we put in the CPU. If you'll note that the CPU has little notches in the side that fit into little notches on the surround of the socket, so that you cannot make a mistake and insert it incorrectly. Once it's sitting nicely in the socket, put down the holding cover and then roll or push the lever forward, and it then clips under there, and it goes under that holding screw fitting there. And now the CPU is tightly in its socket. Then we take the memory modules, and these go into the grey sockets, so we just move the fastening clips aside, and then this way, because you'll note that there is a middle slot that matches a notch in the memory socket. Push that in and just push it at either end till you hear the click. Then put the second one in. Click, click. So now we have the CPU and the memory installed on the motherboard. The last thing we need to do to the motherboard before we can put it into the case is we need to put a cooling fan and heatsink onto the CPU, and this is what we use. You'll see it has thermal paste fixed to the bottom of it, so that you get a good seating and heat transfer from the CPU to the heatsink. So this has 4 fixing points which you just fit into those holes on the motherboard. So we put those like so, and then to fix it, these need to be pressed down and again till you hear a click, and to support the motherboard underneath so that there's no damage. So we push 1, click, 2, the opposite, click, then the other 2, click, and the last one, click. Then the power supply to the fan is just fixed to a socket on the motherboard, and this controls power and the speed of the fan, and they are thermostatically controlled. So now we have everything that we need on the motherboard ready to be mounted into the case. The next thing that we need to do is to fit the power supply to the case. We've already plugged in the necessary cables that we need for the power requirements of of the motherboard and the disk drives and so on that we're putting in. So now we just move this into position in the bottom of the case, and then we fix it in place with 4 screws. The first thing we have to do in installing the motherboard is to insert the backplane panel, which fits over the back of the motherboard like so, into the case. All cases have a standard size opening to install this backplane. So having installed the backplane in the correct opening and with the power supply now firmly in place, we can now look to actually insert and screw the motherboard into place. Now, you take your motherboard and now press the board down in place, and all that we have to do then is fix about half a dozen, 6 or 8 screws to actually screw the motherboard to the case. Okay, so the solid state drive is mounted in its mounting clip and is just slid in like so. Likewise, the conventional 2 GB Western Digital hard drive is into its cradle, and again just clicks into place. Next thing we're going to do is connect our power supply to the motherboard. Now there are 2 locations where this connection is made. Firstly, with this 8-pin 12-volt connection that goes into the motherboard in this very high location up here. And then the other one is this long connector, which also is in 2 parts. The reason being that to be compatible with an older standard connector for older motherboards, then this connects to the long connector here on the motherboard. So just so the power is now connected in the 2 locations to the motherboard. The next thing we do is fit the DVD drive. So we remove the appropriate cover from the front, take the drive and insert it like so, and then press it home till you hear again the click, and then lock it into position by pressing back the locking mechanism. And so now the DVD is mounted in position. So now we have connected the power to both drives and the data cables to both drives. So now we need to connect the other end of the data cables to the appropriate outlet on the motherboard. And you'll notice that we have things called SATA 3, and these are the controllers for the hard drives and optical drives. And this is the connector for the solid state drive, which we want to be the boot drive, and that should connect to outlet 0, which I'm just doing now. Then the second drive is connected to SATA 1. That's now done. So now we also have connected the DVD drive with a data cable and a power cable, and then the the other end of the data cable needs to go to one of the SATA 3 connectors, so we will connect it to number 5, which is the end of the chain. We now have to connect the so-called front panel switches and connectors: power, reset, USB, audio. So now I have connected, these are the power and reset switches here, the front USB ports here, and the front audio ports